If you saw this sitting on a shelf, you'd never believe that it was 3D printed. Book Nooks are awesome. Until they're not. They promise these tiny immersive worlds from your favorite stories, but so many 3D printed ones just fall flat, which is ironic because it's literally 3D. Let me show you how I change that and help you to do it too. Whether you're designing your own or downloading mine for free, I've got some really great tips. And for my first Book Nook, I set out to design a mystic medieval library. No compromises. We have all of our 3D printed parts here, as well as a couple of little extras, nothing crazy. The whole idea is that you can easily do this yourself. So let's get started. It starts with the case, where everything is going to go inside of. And this is something that a lot of people overlook, because it's just a case. And for the most part, people are just squishing between a couple of books. But what if you want it to stick out? What if you want this to be a component of your entire thing? So added some texture to the outside just to give it a little something extra, and didn't forget that spine sticking out from the Book Nook. Now, we're going to level up a little bit more by adding some paint. We're going to start with some paint that's slightly darker than the outside cover. I only had this brown that is basically the same color, so I grabbed some black and I'm going to mix it in. We also add some water to it, and you could be fancy and have a wash, but I am just going with what I already have, just to show you that you don't need to go out and buy anything special. You can buy basic cheap acrylic paint for like $1. And then we are going to just brush it on, and it doesn't have to be perfect either, because the idea is that we're adding some age to it so that it's not flat and plain. Next thing I'm going to do is take some paper towels and just try to get some off of the top. There are two different ways that you can do it. You can try to get some of the bulk of it off just by wiping, and then afterwards I like to do a little bit of dabbing so that it doesn't all come off. Next piece, we have our top and our bottoms, and they slide right in. I did make sure that they matched up so that the pages look the same and look like they're aligned. There are little dovetail grooves. Pretty cool. That's the bottom. We're not going to do the top yet. We're going to save that till later. The next piece that we're going to want to add in is going to be the base. So we're going to do a similar thing that we just did, except this time we're just going to go in with some plain black paint. I'm going to go over this in a few moments with a dry brush too, but I do need it to dry just a little bit more before I can do that. In the meantime, I'm going to start on some of my other pieces. But one of the tips that I did want to give you now is that if you are designing your own from scratch in something like Blender, don't be afraid to decimate. Whenever you add the texture, you want to have a ton of geometry so that it can really come to life. But it doesn't matter whenever you're printing it, whether you're trying to use a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, 0.4, whatever it is. There's only so much detail that you're going to get out of it. So decimate the geometry. It's going to save you so much file size on your computer, as well as whenever you're exporting it as an STL and the slicer has to try to run through it. It'll be so much faster if it has a smaller file. You might be saying to yourself, Chris, if you're just going to paint it anyways, why are you using so many different colors of filament? Why are you paying the extra money for that? And really the reason for me is that it just makes it a little bit easier if you already have that base color, especially if you're new to something like this, which I am. Having something to start off of and not just starting from scratch makes it so much easier. This has been drying long enough, so we're going to be able to do some dry brushing here. Just going to grab another brush that I have lying around. Nothing special. None of this is anything special. And I'm going to use some silver paint. And I'm not even going to bother to put this on the palette or anything. I'm just going to put some right on the brush. Dab off a decent amount, most of it, and then let's make sure it's even more of most of it, and then just lightly go over it, over the top, and that is going to add a little bit of highlight. And I got a little bit more than I wanted, so it has a little bit of a light spot, so I'm going to just go over it and try to normalize it so that everything looks the same. The cool thing is now you have 3 different layers, but probably more. You have the dark layer that we have sinking down to the very bottom, then we have the actual gray of the plastic itself, and then at the top we have our little highlights here, giving it so much depth. It really just makes a huge difference. So we're gonna start doing some assembly now, just assembling as we go so that pieces of plastic have time to dry. I'm going to go ahead and put down a little bit of super glue. Really don't need very much at all because it's going to fit very, very tightly, but doesn't hurt to have a little bit there. All right, so there are back stairs, and then we're going to put down a little bit on top of that. And you do want to try to be careful with your super glue here because, as you probably know, super glue will give it that extra shine, and you really don't want don't want much shine in this scene. All right, and there we have the beginnings of our base. Now, before you get too carried away, we do want to add some LEDs in here. So I'm going to grab 2 LEDs that I'm going to use. And we're just going to wire them in for now, and we'll get everything together later. So I said before, no compromises. And one of the things that took me so long to get right was the fact that I wanted it to have the perception that you were looking down through a long hallway. I didn't want everything to be flat. I didn't want all of the objects to be the exact same size. And it took me a while to figure out how I was going to make it work with a vanishing point 3D modeling. What I ended up doing was taking planes and subdividing them, shrinking one side of it so that it had that vanishing point effect. And then from there, I used a skeleton, and that way I had the exact lines that I wanted to use. And whenever I was building other objects around it, I would use those as reference points, and I would do the exact same thing for the base as well. I created these little tiny books. You could obviously paint them. I don't know that I'm going to right now. We'll probably skip that part. Okay, I guess there's a compromise. And with the books, make sure to just keep your vanishing point consistent. They are actually designed to be a little bit smaller on one end, so just watch that. We are going to take some filling, non-flammable filling, put a little bit of UV resin on it, and then we are going to add that to the tip of our LED. Got some red paint, got some yellow paint. I think you see where this is going. Okay, reverse pseudo card. Let's try this again. I realized I was rushing and I was making things far more difficult on myself, so I took a step back. Remember, no compromises. So here's what I did. First, I extended all of the wires. I was trying to make all the cables reach the power distribution board, and most barely could at best. Rather than fighting the wires and accidentally pulling out LEDs, I just extended all the wires. More about that shortly. Second, I painted the books. I just kept looking at them and thinking, no compromises, so why am I compromising? I went back with a tiny brush and did my best. If you have a 3D printer with multiple tool heads, just print them in separate colors. I'm sure that would look really awesome, but I just couldn't justify all of the wasted filament that I'd have using a normal AMS. One day we'll have multiple tool heads and I'll be able to do that. Third, I cleaned up the fire LEDs. Again, I was rushing, they weren't looking so hot, no pun intended, so I just redid them. So here we are. Let's get everything connected because I am excited to see this thing light up. So to extend the LED wires, I took some basic 28 gauge wire, put on a heat shrink tube, and boom, done. It made me really question why I was making things so much more difficult for myself by being lazy. So what I'm going to do, you could either use wire strippers if you have them handy. I just have my cutters handy, so I'm going to go ahead and almost cut the whole way through. This does take a little bit of learning. You'll get there eventually. And then just pull out, and there you have it. The casing is removed, and you have your bare wire. From there, I'm going to go ahead and throw on my heat shrink before I forget, because I always forget. And it's really frustrating to then have to undo them and redo them. Next thing to do is whenever you're connecting them, really all that matters is that you are consistent. For me, the anode is the copper cable, so I did red with copper, and then I did black with the silver colored. And what I'm going to do is just put my two wires together, and I am going to twist them together using my needle nose pliers again, just because they're convenient. They're here. All right, after a few good twists, I will just straighten it up. I will add the heat shrink tube. Then we would take the heat gun. I'm not going to do it because you know what a heat gun does and you know what a heat gun sounds like. Blast it, and then it shrinks it around the tube, and you have a good connection. And now I'm going to get ready to connect it to the power distribution board. I'll do it in a few seconds on the actual model, but just to show you what to do, again, remember, just keep the colors the same, red with red, black with black, you'll be fine. And so I'm going to take my red wire, I'm going to add a resistor, because if you don't, there will be too much voltage going through these little tiny LEDs and they will blow up. Ask me how I know. Then you get to rewire it again. So you connect it to your red wire again, then we have our resistor. Go ahead, and these are really cool because it's just a simple twist to get them connected. So I'll go ahead, and I'm trying to show you the best that I can. Line it up inside, twist your screwdriver, and you have a secure connection. We'll do the exact same thing on the other side with the black wire. Put it the whole way in. And again, just screw down and you have a good connection. So what I will do, and I'm not going to do it with this one, we'll do it with the actual one in a moment, but again, red to red, black to black, and we're going to connect it in parallel so that in case one of them were to become disconnected, I wouldn't lose all the LEDs, it would just be that one particular one. All right, so let's get this thing wired and see what it looks like. And there you have it, my completed book Nook. You'll obviously see that there's a USB cable hanging out the back still. I'm going to get a power bank to put inside of it. I just haven't had a chance to get one yet. Just make sure that if you do, it's not a smart one, because the smart ones detect the voltage, and if it's too low, like with only 5 LEDs, it'll turn itself off after like a minute. Alternatively, if you want to hardwire it like what I'm doing right now, you could always just put a hole in the STL, whether it's the top or the bottom, and you could run it through that way. So now you've seen the assembly and you've heard some of the tips. Before I even hit the print button, I focused on distinguishing elements of the design. I used a vanishing point to create perspective, so it looks like you're looking down a long hallway instead of at a flat book Nook. I added different elements of texture throughout it to create more depth, and then after I was done, I decimated that geometry to keep the file size manageable, both the Blender file itself and the STL. Remember, keeping the STL small makes it easier to slice. Remember, there's a point of diminishing return on just how detailed you make a model. When printing, I recommend picking filaments that match the color that you intend it to be in the end, but that is personal preference. Swap between a 0.2mm nozzle and a 0.4mm nozzle depending on what you're printing. For example, if it's a bookshelf that's square, just use a 0.4mm and crank up those layer lines. If it's something detailed like a sconce, 0.2mm and ultra fine detail. And when you're printing something narrow and tall, it helps to use a build plate that you trust. Nothing is worse than something falling over at the end. The cryo grip did great for me, but pick what works best for you. Finally, I leveled it up with some simple paint, nothing crazy. A little black wash, some dry brush, really something anybody can do. I made my LEDs part of the story, either as fire or creating light inside of objects. And I took a step back instead of rushing to get it done, because it's a hobby after all. I should be able to enjoy what I'm doing. I hope you enjoyed this model as much as I did, and you can download it in the link in the description. If you enjoyed the video, throw me a like, because it really helps. I've got a lot more planned, so hit the subscribe button, because this is just the start of the Print Alchemist.